Hi everyone, I'm Airier, and today we're checking out Overly Sarcastic Productions Train Fights. Now, I'm just going to say, the only train fight that comes to mind off the top of my head is actually from, I think it's the second game in the Nathan Drake series, and for some reason I forgot the name Uncharted. I don't know why that was. But I love the beginning of that where you start on the train, it's falling, and it just starts from there. That is what I think of when I get to a train fight, and I'm sure there's a bunch of others that are going to stand out and be obvious in hindsight, but that's what I think about coming into this. So I'm going to be comparing everything to probably one of the best games that ever came out on a PlayStation system. I say one of because there's a huge list, so I'm just going to say they're all on the same level. I'm very biased on this, and I will judge Red very harshly if she does not mention it because I will just sit in the corner and be very sad. It's not a good reason, but it's mine and I'm sticking to it. More importantly, you guys know the deal. There's a link below to the original video. Hit it up. Let's get started. Trope Talks.
Boy, heroes sure are busy. Being a protagonist is a complicated profession, and the one nice thing about it is you usually don't need to worry too much about the commute because the plot has a tendency to find you wherever you are. But being a danger magnet...
As someone who had to previously commute for an hour and a half, God damn you, Red. I was finally able to forget that. Threshold danger? Oh, yeah.
Magnet doesn't mean your average protagonist can slack off. A fundamental part of any standard issue hero's journey is the journey bit, and most protagonists will eventually find themselves jarringly uprooted from their home and turned loose in a big scary world to harrowingly make the grueling trek from point
Really
A
dumb
to
story
point
if they
B.
don't.
And when that happens, it can be nice to...
How convenient departures. The Road of Trials boarding. Magic Flight delayed. Belly of the Whale delayed. Woman as Temptress cancelled. Apotheosis delayed. Wait. Oh, that's all the other various tropes. Magic Flight would be Aladdin. Belly of the Whale is... It's not Noah. God, it's a biblical story that I can't seem to remember. Woman as Temptress. That's basically a lot of fictional media, like any noir female. Most noir females. And Apotheosis has become a god. So, actually, I don't really know much about that trope. It seems to be more I think I've known of in D&D and some of the wuxia stories I've admittedly gotten bored of.
To have public transportation to rely on for some of that trekking. Or so you'd think, but a protagonist's work is never done.
I am a normal vehicle, come closer. Oh, yeah, it's a train, of course. He's going to that one.
And while somebody from the real world might think of trains as reliable, fast, and comfortable modes of transportation...
No, I rode a train down to Florida. One, down to Florida should have been my first mistake. And two, dear God, if you ever drive... It's better. If you ever fly, it's probably more expensive, but it's actually, no, never mind. It's probably just as expensive as flying. To take a train north of DC, sure, fine, easy. On the West Coast, I have no idea. If you're ever down from DC to Florida, don't. It is the most uncomfortable piece of crap I can imagine. I don't mean that figuratively. I mean, literally, I felt like crap because I was right next to the freaking bathroom door that wouldn't close, and I'm not sure how many other cars had that, but ours definitely did. They keep the AC down to 65 degrees when you can see the window fogging up from the outside, and you're just sitting there going like, wow, I'm sitting on cardboard. It's like being on Spirit Airlines for 24 hours. Don't make that mistake. I did. I regret it. I'm never doing it again. It was a horrible, horrible thing. Don't.
The character in the wonderful world of fiction should be aware that trains are plot magnets of the highest order, and there is no such thing as an uneventful journey. It's a pretty foundational rule of storytelling.
But if they don't see me eating and sleeping, how will they know that I have 2 hours... For some reason, I thought that was horses. I have 2 hours to tell the story, so they'll just have to suspend that disbelief. You know, there's actually a lot of people I know who do write out in stories every little moment of the journey, eating and sleeping. And frankly, sometimes that's done well. The Hobbit. There's many times, though, where it's not. And you're sitting there going, if I skip this, it doesn't change anything. You got to have impactful moments of either exploration to have a journey where you see every little moment work. Most people won't. They don't. They completely forget, oh yeah, the plot actually needs to matter. Unless it's a travel fake and where you could just be looking at cool things and that's the point of it.
That most of the time we're going to be seeing our protagonists doing the plot. When the characters are doing anything other than plot advancement, it's usually thought of as filler. And for the sake of pacing, basic or repetitive elements of the story are usually skipped over. We're generally...
I have read a book before where someone decided not to cut out the filler. If I hadn't been reading it professionally for a assignment to review it, I would have burned the book. It wasn't my copy, so I couldn't. but I was very tempted to burn a copy to burn it. Or, well, to buy a copy to burn it. A bit of a Freudian slip there, but also very intentional because I couldn't stand it. Yeah. I have opinions
to the protagonist
about this.
24/7, following them into all of their naps and bathroom breaks. And generally, it's pretty easy to subdivide a story into things that should be done on screen versus
On screen, what the audience sees, key confrontations, occasional breaks, important conversation, exposition dumps, off screen, events during time skips, random chatting, bathroom breaks, details from montages. Oh, yeah, punching the sandbag. Sleep. Again, I've seen so many people not understand that and write these moments in. And if you could just take out an entire scene and it changes nothing, it should be cut. Hell, sometimes the exposition dump can fall into that as well because you don't need the exposition to understand what's going on. It's a problem. Hell, if anything. Yeah, honestly, just the important conversation, the key confrontations need to be left in. And even the occasional breaks can kind of be cut out depending on what kind of story you're in.
versus off-screen. Unless you're hiding mysteries or crucial twists in the off-screen zone,
True.
It's mostly reserved for boring, mundane, or time-consuming logistical elements that the audience doesn't need to see to understand what's happening, while the on-screen zone is for plot advancement, character arcs, and exposition about the way the world works. Basically, things the audience wants or needs to see to understand the story. As a side effect of this, an audience can generally assume that if the camera is following the characters through a seemingly mundane and uneventful scenario, it's probably going to stop being uneventful pretty quickly, or else the camera wouldn't be.
What a peaceful day. And it's literally the guy going, first time? Because he doesn't realize what's about to happen. Yeah. The alternative being where the auditor thinks they're making a smart idea to fake out the audience by having exactly what they think not happen to happen. By that being, I'm setting it up to look like something's going to happen, and then nothing does. I hate that. I hate that so much. You know, I'm not even... This is about train fights, and I'm getting into all the little issues you can get when you write something badly. I'm a writing snob, aren't I? Huh. I'm not going to think about this too much right now. Just going to put that in a box and ignore it.
There. And characters traveling to the next key plot location is a pretty common staple of the off-screen zone. If it isn't skipped over entirely, we might get a...
Nice! Lord of the Rings. Again, this is the movie where in the actual books, they went into detail. And some of them were actually fascinating. And some of them were going through the woods and meeting an old... I have no idea what Tom Nook... Not Tom Nook. Wow. The old man in the woods with his tree wife and thing. Not end. Fish, wife, whatever was. I completely forgot his name. Wow, it's been a while since I read it, but I completely forgot his name.
Montage of the characters walking, riding, driving, sailing, or flying from point A to point B, with minor rest stops at interrupting plot points if the story is feeling spicy. But those interruptions are optional, and sometimes we'll just get a shot of the character getting on the transport, a wide shot of stock footage of the transport in motion, and then a shot of the character getting off the transport at their destination, so the plot can move on from there. There is plot to be found in the act of traveling itself, but unless the point of the story is to highlight the calm, boring mundanity of the process of travel, usually the plot we get to see happens in the form of environmental hazards or ambushes or other exciting cinematic twists and turns that disrupt the expected boringness of the travel. Generally, the traveling itself is kind of skipped over, or just happening in the background while the characters do other stuff. And
like
this is reasonable because usually a character in transit isn't going to be up to much. The one reliable exception to this rule is if the characters take a train. Trains are danger magnets, and if our hero...
Okay, and that's why we're going into this. We're showing what isn't beforehand. Because where normally travel is something you either skip over or mention specifically for reasons of, hey, here's something plot relevant you need to see. This is the exception of the movement is part of the plot.
Heroes find themselves on a train for any reason, they are going to have to deal with a lot of train-specific hazards. In fact, they don't even need to be on the train for this principle to apply. The simple appearance of a train in the background of a set piece frequently demands that it be included in the choreography, usually by getting itself imperiled so the protagonists need to stop it. There are a number of reasons for this principle, first among them being that trains are rad as hell, but there's more to unpack here than just my transportational biases, so let's get into it. One big reason...
Wait. What do you say, transportational bias?
But there's more to unpack here than just my transportational biases, so...
No, that's completely incorrect. This is her transportational completely accurate assessment. Despite my earlier ramblings about how I absolutely hated train reliability, when they work, they're great. When they don't, no. But when they work, it's great. It's just that working part.
So let's get into it. One big reason train fights are so common seems to be that they're multi-purpose. It lets...
perk, the fight and flight. Oh, because you're moving and having the fight at the same time. Characters get to have the fight without impeding their progress getting where they need to go. My stop's coming up. I'll make it quick. Yeah, I guess that makes sense because it moves the plot forward and moves the characters where they want to go for the next plot point at the same time as having the action scene. Yeah, it serves two purposes. Rather than having to go filler or skipping the montage, they have something to give the audience something to focus on.
The writer accomplished two things at once.
This would work
in
on
most transportation
probably would work on a
montages,
plane
the
as well.
character's forward progression is interrupted by the plot when they get ambushed or deal with an environmental hazard or something, and then they have to backtrack or take the long way around or run away. And at the end of it, they still have to travel the rest of the way from point A to point B. Punching up the plot through exciting interruptions actually halts the overall advancement of the story by preventing our characters from continuing on to the next location where the main plot is. None of this applies in a train fight, because no matter what's happening in the train is still usually
I have no idea
getting
what that
from
is.
point A to point B the whole time. Even when the train's progress becomes part of the hazard, it's usually
Nice. Red's pulling up Static Shock. Sorry. Loved that show growing up. It's so freaking good. I wish they hadn't completely abandoned him as a character.
just because somebody cuts the brakes and the train starts making progress dangerously fast, which is still ultimately a good thing for the overall plot advancement. No villain schemes to stop the train and force the passengers to disembark early. This means the writers can throw whatever they want to the characters without impeding their ability to move the plot along by getting where they need to go, which is a very useful bit of sleight of hand. And on the flip side, if the characters don't want to go to the train's final destination for whatever reason, that automatically turns its arrival into a ticking clock. The characters have to deal with their plot-based problems before the train reaches its station, or a bridge that's out, or a dead end at alarmingly high speeds, or whatever.
Huh. I guess it makes sense. It's not even just that they're moving point A to point B, but it adds the extra level of peril. Huh. I didn't actually consider that part. But I mean, it makes sense in hindsight because that's how most people use trains. Hell, the example I brought up at the very beginning was literally starting with peril from being in a train where you're already over the cliff. So for anyone who didn't start the game, Uncharted 2, yeah, you start over the cliff on a train hanging from the edge. So yeah, I guess the peril in something that's already moving to the destination and then finding out what the destination was as the course of the game makes sense.
Waiting at the end of the tracks. And if the story factors in the idea that the train is out of control and needs to be slowed down or diverted before impact, that adds tension to the ticking clock that makes the whole thing feel even more exciting. But logistics aside, even if the characters traveling to the train's destination isn't central,
what makes a train fight fun? In closed space, have characters very limited room to maneuver. Excuse me, this is the quiet car. I am so sorry. And he has a gun out there. I guess he needs a silencer for that. I'm feeling bad about that joke. I am so sorry. I'm not going to cut it out because it's my own fault at this point and I need to suffer for it.
To the plot advancement, trains and similarly shaped modes of transportation have a bunch of qualities that make choreographing fights in them very interesting. Most obviously, they're an innately claustrophobic environment. Trains are narrow, fast-moving, cluttered environments without many places to hide. This can
and you can also include a shaky cam as well because most trains are not steady. If anything, that would add a sense of motion that would be very easy to convey by just having the background move a bit. Oh, I didn't even think of that. And to do that in animation, you would have a background that's moving at a slightly different angle as opposed to the foreground. Oh, I have to remember that if anyone ever tries that. That would be really cool to see.
Can be good for high-octane fights as well as more slow-paced, sneaky conflicts, like if the protagonist needs to hide from bad guys in a space that's barely 10 feet across. Since a train is one big straight line, characters can't readily sneak past each other unless they go outside of it. And on that note, it is an absolute law of fiction that any characters fighting in or around a train must eventually take the fight on top of the train.
I do not know this movie.
The narrative benefits of this are obvious. This is an extremely perilous environment with high-speed hazards galore. I'm
pretty sure that was in the first Mission Impossible movie. Specifically fighting in the tunnel, which is what she's drawing here. Extreme fight fun. Extremely dangerous battlefield. Should we go back inside? You first. They're still fighting the same characters.
Is difficult and dangerous, and a character can be smoothly knocked out of the fight just by kicking them over the side, which makes for clean and efficient minion disposal or a convenient fake-out death for a protagonist who goes over the edge.
Oh yeah, Bucky early on, which, as far as I can understand, and I'm very much guessing on this, I think he actually did fall in the initial comics, and that's how he got him back. It's like, he survived somehow. Science. Plot. And that's what they did here. Admittedly, you shouldn't really survive this as kind of soup after this kind of fall. Yeah.
Which is shockingly common, especially if the train is going over water. Likely hazards include tunnels, inconveniently close spurs of rock, or support struts that our characters need to dodge around and get absolutely wrecked by. Mileage may vary depending on a character.
In deadly danger, moral support for flying.
individual power set. For some characters, this is a supremely deadly threat, but if, for example, the character having the train fight is Spider-Man, the peril is significantly reduced, and the fight mostly turns into exciting acrobatic spectacle.
Admittedly, yeah.
Mobility-improving power sets can usually have a pretty good time with a train fight, but even high-powered characters who are just heavy hitters might have a much more uncomfortable time slowly and carefully trying not to get absolutely bodied by the environment around them.
So at that point, it's not so much showing the danger of the fight as showing either the cinematographer or, in this case, the writer's usage of how to show off their characters in ways that they don't normally get to see. That would be very interesting in a writing standpoint, trying to show the interaction of how their power interacts with the environment that's mostly theater of the mind at that point, because novel format would do that. But here, yeah, the Spider-Man films would be a really good way to show, here's what the acrobatic looks like in a tight space, how he's just zipping and floating around almost. Yeah, because that's a lot more interesting than just big open field guy strong when you actually need that level of dexterity and movement. Huh. So it's as much a showpiece set as it is a threat itself. Oh, I guess that makes sense. Honestly, a lot of this video so far seems to be me realizing that these are obvious things that you would see and understand, but you never really think about them because they're worked in really well when done right.
If they're particularly heavy hitters, they might end up in the unenviable position of needing to stop the
Incredibles.
train with their bare hands. This is actually one
Classic
of the fun
Superman.
and subtle elements of the train fight. It provides a pretty versatile space of threats, so even if a character happens to
High winds, impact hazard, innocent in peril, high speed, narrow battlefield, stop the train, the rails are out, falling risk. Yeah, it's all the different things that could be dangerous around it. I guess I brought up planes earlier, and it would have the same thing, but without seeing the ground, it probably doesn't feel nearly as real. And the fake out deaths are way harder to believe.
to have the right set of skills or powers to be categorically unconcerned with one of them, they can still end up having to wrangle something they're not prepared to just casually brush off. There's a reason trains are staples of superhero set pieces. Not even having Superman's powers will guarantee that a train will be 100% safe in his presence. And the primary reason this still manages to be a threat, even when the protagonists are Mondo overpowered, is that your average train is full of regular people who are not Mondo overpowered.
Or
if
durable.
heroes aren't navigating train choreography in fear for their own lives, they can definitely be persuaded to worry about the lives of everybody else. This is why the runaway train threat is so popular. The protagonists don't just need to worry about fighting off random mooks, they also need to worry about stopping 300 tons of high-speed metal before the laws of physics does it for them the messy way. The runaway
Yeah, I mean, it's why that Spider-Man 2 film worked when that specific section came up. He could win the fight, but does he win the fight without anyone dying? That was the threat there. And admittedly, it was a huge set piece to show that they could animate or CGI or green screen him in such a way that looked really damn cool. It still stands out as one of my favorites. Even if the movie was on some parts, that was so neat.
train threat is basically a free bonus plot point that comes bundled with the train set piece, and plenty of writers take advantage of the package deal by casually knocking out the train brakes and giving the characters one more danger to deal with.
At this point, though, I'm almost wondering, is it cliche to knock out the train brakes? Or is it almost a required where if you don't knock out the brakes in some way or remove that control, then it almost seems to trivialize the fight where you could just walk away when you get to the end of it? I don't think I've seen it played where they actually successfully arrive and the fight's still going on and they just leave the train while doing it. And on the one hand, it will be interesting to see once, but on the other hand, would it feel like a ripoff if someone tried to do that? I think I'd actually fall in the fact of it would be a cliche to always knock out the brakes, always make it go off the rails, always make it lose control somehow, but not doing it would almost feel like a cop-out. It'd be like having a Chekhov's gun, putting it on the table, and then walking away from it and ignoring it and just showing like, hey guys, we got this awesome set piece. We're not going to use it. It would bug me. Now, maybe if it's done well, I'd be fine with it, but it almost feels like if you have the train piece and you're having things happen there, it's not just a segue. Okay, that makes a lot more sense when you forget that a segue is also a form of transportation at this point. But you know what I mean? If you take that out, it feels like you almost need to have that now for the set piece to work. Huh. I need to think about that more because that's actually interesting where you need to have certain tropes to make this even not seem like a cop-out.
The train is full of innocent bystanders, they'll need to figure out a way to stop the train safely, which can be tough even for a superpowered badass, while if the train is empty, they'll just need to escape it safely before it goes boom, which can be a challenge for anybody if it's going fast enough. And of course, a train can provide a fascinating plot hook even if the characters are completely unconcerned with riding it. If the characters aren't on the train, the writer just needs to give them a reason to want something that's on the train.
For example, that would be at the beginning of Final Fantasy VII and the remake, where Cloud had to jump on the train to get away from the enemy. Or any... Actually, I think there was one in The Matrix, but it's been so long since I've seen those movies, I don't actually remember if they had a train fight. Or was it a highway fight? I legitimately do not remember. Huh. Weird.
MacGuffin held by an antagonist is the most common lore, or just a MacGuffin being hauled as cargo. And this segues cleanly into the extra fun subtrope of the train fight known as the train heist. It can include 100% of the same plot beats as the train fight, with the added bonus.
Must be the Solo movie, because they said heist. That has to be the Solo movie. I haven't seen that. I did not know there was a heist involved. You know, in hindsight, it makes sense. But yeah, I would not know any of these clips off the top of my head.
Bonus that the characters usually need to leap onto the moving train and break in from the outside. This has all the same perils as a standard train fight, plus an element of stealth, especially if the train has guards to prevent exactly this kind of thing. Train heist.
And for that reason, you'd almost need them to fail the stealth aspect for it to be fun. Unless you're doing an intro to show how competent the character is. Anything that has actual stakes, they need to fail. Otherwise, it feels like a cop-out.
Have the same final stop ticking clock as any train fight.
I say fail. I mean fail in the sense that they get caught and then they have to fight their way out somehow to show either their ability to escape, their ability to de-escalate the situation, which is usually not going to happen, or their ability to just fuck all kinds of shit up to get away.
With the added tension that the characters heisting the train almost certainly want to be well away from it by the time it arrives at its destination. Not only is the train probably well guarded, it's heading directly for the people likely to be most upset if it gets robbed. There are several little subtropes that are basically just
chase the train, break in from outside, bad guys inside, take the fight outside. Yeah, that's every fight. Low clearance KD. Oh, because someone gets knocked off. Brakes are out, bridges out, which honestly are pretty similar. Disconnect the cars, knocked over the side, which is pretty similar to the KD, but yeah, I can see the difference there. Innocent passengers sneak past the bad guys. Hijackers, robbers, volatile cargo. Ooh, that one I actually haven't seen nearly as much, but it's really cool when you do that. And that thing where the villain specifically endangers the train and the heroes have to let them escape while they save it instead. Oh, yeah. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised she didn't do the tying the damsel to the tracks trope, which wouldn't really be a train fight. It's more a train track trope than anything else. Yeah.
stock beats of a train fight, train-related hazards or complications that pop up pretty regularly. The runaway train threat is the big one, but one common factor is how the characters manage to get onto the train in the first place. If they don't board at the station like a civilized person, they probably have to launch themselves onto it from a height, catch up to it in another vehicle, or somehow both at once. Which is a fun and impressive stunt, even though, narratively speaking, the character is basically never actually in danger of missing the jump. You can't have a train fight if they don't get onto the train, so it's a bit of a foregone conclusion, even if it would be a very dangerous thing to do in real life. You also get things like one or more train cars being disconnected by pulling the pin between the cars. Apparently, it's just that easy, which can complicate the runaway train threat significantly.
I don't actually know how difficult it is to disconnect a train. Which is weird, because I remember at one point I did actually look this up. And I remember thinking, oh, that's actually pretty difficult. But I don't remember why. Sorry, this is just one of those moments where I know I knew this at one point, and it's bugging me because I don't anymore.
Significantly if the train still has a ton of momentum, but is now lacking a car with any actual controls that could stop it. This can also let the train fight get split across multiple tracks, or redirect part of the train to a hazardous stretch of rail, like a blown-out bridge. Characters left on the wrong stretch of train have a brief and perilous window of time where they can leap from one train car to another. One extremely common beat of the train fight comes from the simple fact that most one-on-one train fights are choreographed along the direction of the train's travel, since that's the direction of the train that has the most space to work with, which means generally one participant in the fight can see where the train is going, and more importantly, what hazards are coming their way. So it's very common for the fighter in this advantageous position to fake out or distract their opponent in such a way that they get taken out.
Did he crash land a helicopter onto a train? Apparently Jackie Chan films were way more crazy than I realized. God damn.
Out by a low-hanging support strutter sign. And there's one more meta-narrative.
Okay, that I just want to take a second to acknowledge this is probably one of his pre or post comedy sections. And you can see he still has the comedy chops in him on top of everything else that makes him a badass.
In such a way that they get taken out by a low-hanging support strutter sign. And there's one
just that little, he's just already down and squatting.
One more meta-narrative benefit to setting a conflict on a train. Since a train's primary deal is that it travels through areas that frequently don't have much else going on, the characters on the train can be effectively cut off from the outside world. It's a bottle episode on wheels, which is the term for a story that takes place almost entirely in a single location, usually to save money on production. But in a Watts...
Oh. That's... Sorry, this is just a me thing. I knew what a bottle episode was. I didn't realize it was done to save on production. In hindsight, that's so blatantly obvious. I'm judging myself for not realizing in advance. Yeah, of course it would, because you only have so many set pieces. In narratives and like fiction, written fiction, it wouldn't matter because it doesn't change if you write something crazy or write something small. But in anything where you have to shoot it or generate it somehow, yeah, that makes sense. Just judging myself for not thinking that in advance, though.
Sonian sense, the bottle episode's primary strength is that it traps the characters in a tense situation and forces them to deal with it without outside resources or help. When the train is moving at high speeds, the characters typically can't leave because of the aforementioned speed problem.
Cutting them off even if they're not in the middle of nowhere.
Reaches its destination often causes a completely different kind of problem by stranding the characters in the middle of nowhere. There's basically no easy way off a train until it gets where it's going.
There was a Yu-Gi-Oh! Train episode? You know what? Sure, why not? There's probably one of everything at this point.
Which means whatever happens on the train, the characters are stuck there until the writer decides to let them go. And since train journeys can take anywhere from minutes to days, a writer's got a very forgiving window of flexibility for keeping the characters stuck however long they need. This bottle episode setup can facilitate everything from train top punch-ups to slow-paced murder investigations where none of the characters involved...
Murder on the Orient Express. And the mustache would have been Clouseau.
...can escape. And that's...
No, Clouseau is something different. Or is it? Pierrot. That's the name. Clouseau is the bumbling one.
Formula for a lot more kinds of conflict than just trying not to fall off the roof. While train fights and train heists are the most visually spectacular kind of train plot, trains make a really good confined setting for all kinds of shenanigans. And as Murder on the Orient Express proved handily, the claustrophobic environment of a train can facilitate all kinds of tension and conflict without anyone having to at any point draw a weapon or initiate a physical brawl. It's a good...
Oh, for anyone who didn't figure out what she was referencing there based on the name Murder, it would be that the tension is they're stuck in a train in Siberia and they don't know who the murderer is, but there's a dead person and there's only so many people who could have done it. So you don't know who's the killer. Is it safe here? Is it safe there? What's going to happen? Spoilers. The guy deserved it. Yeah. That's why I said spoilers. Also, the book is probably closer to 50 years old than not at this point, if not even older. I don't actually know when Agatha Christie wrote this. Also, if it's not Agatha Christie, then I've been misattributing this one for a long time. I think it is, though, so I'm not sure.
I don't think nobody's ever jarringly shoehorned action sequences into an adaptation of it, and the mistaken idea that it would be really cool if Hercule Poirot had spent more time sprinting. One question I've been pondering...
Wait, seriously? I hadn't seen the movie. I didn't realize they tried to make him an action star. The guy's literally just a detective, not an action star. Why? His entire thing is being brainy and figuring it out. Sure, why not?
The whole time I've been thinking about this trope is, why trains specifically? There's plenty of kinds of transportation, but none of them seem to have this many tropes this solidly defined around them. Cars...
Oh, she's bringing up the one I was thinking, cars, but I guess cars are too common, and there's not enough leeway within them, because if you're fighting on top of a car, you just jump to the next one. And planes... while it feels a little off, you can't really fight outside of a plane without being blown off. Trains are moving slow enough where the outside is a place you can go. I mean, there's been planes, trains, and automobiles, but that's not really the right one. I guess more snakes on a plane would fit, but even then, you got only so much you can deal with.
Cars are good for high-speed chases and getting wrecked. Planes might get hijacked or wrecked. Ships depend a lot on the setting, but will usually be attacked by pirates or wrecked. If they aren't...
What was that from? Oh, that looks like 90s CG. What? You ever have the weird sense of deja vu where you've seen this, but you haven't the slightest idea why you've seen this? I have no idea what this is, but I swear I've seen it somewhere. If anyone knows in the comments, let me know, because at this point, it's just going to drive me crazy.
Attacked by pirates or wrecked, if they
don't
aren't
know
just
what that
being
is.
used to ferry the characters from point A to point B, their role in the story is still likely to be pretty one-note, if they play a real role in the story at all. When it
Is it art? Admittedly, I've seen some usage in random montages where you have the person in this beautiful vista and you get to see it out of the windows and there's nothing actually happening on the train. Nothing is going to happen. They're just there reading something. And even then, the purpose of it is not so much the train itself as giving you a way to see the setting and where they're going, while also showing you the details of exposition, usually reading a letter to explain what's happening. I think that's done well because it shows the middle ground of here's where they're heading from. So you get the scenery detail showing you they're going away from something or what they're arriving at while you're getting the exposition, usually hearing the character's thoughts out loud, seeing whatever they're reading off of. I've seen that specific setup used in multiple books and movies, so maybe it's its own trope of the train reveal. But I've only seen it a handful of times, so I don't think it would be nearly as codified yet as this entire thing.
a character in a movie gets in a car, that tells you nothing about how the scene is about to play out, because the fact that they're getting into a car specifically is usually not important. Maybe they're going to get roped into a street race, which does kind of matter that they're in a car, but maybe they're just going to have a contemplative private character moment, or maybe there's a murderer in the backseat and they're about to get super kidnapped. It's a very non-specific setting, and that means it doesn't have specific tropes. Something about trains makes them a playground for scene choreography.
Hey! Uncharted 2. Nice.
But I don't actually think trains are the only kind of vehicle that facilitates this kind of fight scene. And I know this because the Shang-Chi bus fight basically has all the same beats as a train fight. It just happens to take place on a bus instead of a train. It utilizes the same narrow battlefield, part of the fight takes place on the outside of the bus, it even has a the brakes are out runaway vehicle subplot they need to resolve.
Admittedly, brakes are out on a bus are pretty common. I think it was Rush. What was it? There was a movie where the bus couldn't slow down, and if it did, it would blow up or something. Actually, I think there's been a few movies that did that trope. I haven't seen them because those are action movies I just didn't care for, but...
The difference is it isn't on rails. Trains are kind of in the Goldilocks zone of transportation when it comes to choreography potential. They're large...
Because too small for a car because it's much more intimate by default, and you can't really have enough interaction with more than a couple people. Or too big because the boat is its own massive location. And even a smaller yacht is still, doesn't have the same effect. It's just wide enough where you can do all the crazy shit still. Huh.
Large enough to accommodate a decent-sized cast of characters, protagonists, antagonists, and bystanders alike, unlike a small vehicle like a car, which can basically house a half-dozen people tops, fewer if anyone's throwing elbows. But trains aren't so large that they give the characters too much freedom of movement, like if a story is set on a cruise ship or similarly massive transport. The characters can go outside the train, but it's not completely safe, another Goldilocks zone between vehicles.
Oh, so that's what she meant. It's like, I actually think I mentioned this earlier, just bring it up now, just in the image. So yeah, there's a little risk with the train. Getting off a car or a bike, yeah, sure, you can jump off to the side. Or you can just slow down and get off. Where the train, you can't really slow down. It's not that easy. And then there's subs, rockets, boat. You don't get off because falling off is not just death, but going outside, except for maybe a boat, is kind of just not going to happen regardless. I mean, there's a danger and an element to getting outside of the spaceship as its own aspect. For sub, nah, there's no way of getting off a sub unless you're at the surface. And even then, it's not a random, let's take this fight outside moment. And if it was, it'd be some kind of crazy overpowered DBZ aspect, and that's not going to happen for a lot of places.
Another Goldilocks zone between vehicles like cars, where you can stop them and get out no problem, or vehicles like submarines and airplanes, where there is absolutely no safe way to leave them before they reach their destination. So you end up with room for a decent-sized cast where they still feel trapped with one another, moderate levels of peril that aren't immediately deadly for anyone who goes out through a window, and a metric buttload of little plot hooks and environmental hazards the characters can deal with while they work their way around the space. Another benefit might be that trains can be justified in showing up in a lot of different settings.
And you're sure it's magical? Can't you tell by the hat? Oh, because the train has a wizard hat. Or a witch hat, or... Yeah. Speaking of a lot of settings, Galaxy Railways for space, Hogwarts for magic, and Spider-Man for urban fantasy and or superhero fix. So, yeah, they're used in a lot of settings effectively because they're just old enough where they could be old-timey, but they're just still useful enough that you could see them in anything in the future as well. There is actually timeliness to them. Huh. Makes sense.
Anything modern has trains galore, no matter how many superheroes are running around in it. If it's anything historical post-1800, you can easily slap a steam train in there. If it's a fade...
I mean, I thought they had something similar to trains prior to 18. Nah, it was probably more of just a novelty, if anything else. Kind of like how there were hot air balloons, but you were not traveling by them.
setting, you can finagle a wizard with weird
Magitech.
ideas into laying down some tracks. Even in space adventure sci-fi, you can throw together a maglev monorail high-speed super train to justify that it's in space.
Again,
even
never saw that movie.
post-apocalypses can have
Maybe I will,
working
maybe I won't.
trains.
I have no idea if
And
it's good.
circling back to that very first point, almost like we're on a rail of some kind, it can be very beneficial.
Really? Really, Red? Are you making a railroading joke? Because frankly, you should. This is completely justified at this point.
For a writer to give their characters a fast way to get from point A to point B. There's a real incentive to work trains or train-like transportation into stories if the writer doesn't want to write 3 months of hiking and camping or time skip through a lot of potentially juicy character development time. I feel like the reason train fights are so popular across so many genres is just that trains happen to have won the trope lottery. They're suitable to too many environments, they work in too many contexts, they facilitate too many exciting action scenes and challenge the characters in too many unique ways.
I'd even throw in there what I mentioned of just random character pieces. If you don't use a train for anything action-paced or action-packed or plot-relevant, you could use it to show really quick transitions without having to delve into a montage of travel time. And even then, just going from one scenery to the other could be well done if you have an author who's very adept at scenery detail. I'm looking at you, Brandon Sanderson. It's kind of his bread and butter, is that kind of minutia. And outside of that, there's still people who could do it well. But it's harder when you don't have plot helping along, or I guess hindering it if you needed it.
You may not like it, but this is what peak performance looks like. So, yeah?
Considering how many times I brought up environmental details as shown from a train in here, I figured there's probably something she's done that went over that. And when I finished the episode, the very first clip that popped up was environmental storytelling as one of the other tropes. So I think I know what I'm doing next week. More importantly, for this one, I like this because it's so many points that are so completely obvious. And I'm like, okay, God, I know this. This makes sense. Why didn't I ever think of this? It's one of the things I really enjoy about when Red covers tropes. Some of them I get, I can add a little here, a little there, but a lot of them is like, this makes sense. It makes so much sense. Why didn't I think of this? And it's just kicking myself for it. But I love this because it's so obvious that I never thought about it. But having it pointed out is fun to me, which, you know, when I say it like that, that actually sounds a little masochistic. I make videos embarrassing myself normally, so probably par for course at this point. All the same, I really like this, and I can't wait to see what we're doing next. Which, at the time I'm recording this, I haven't seen which one to pull for tomorrow's live stream, which may or may not be reading 50 Shades of Grey. I'm afraid of what I'm going to do tomorrow. Yeah, whatever the next video looks like, you'll figure out what the live stream was. Will it be me doing something fun or me reading 50 Shades of Grey? I don't know. I made that option. I hate myself for it. Yeah. Either way, thanks for watching, everyone. There's a link below to the original video, and considering this is the longest video I've recorded after having some dental surgery, I'm glad I could actually do this because I wasn't sure I could. Last time, I was out for about a month. This time, it wasn't. I'm very glad for that. Either way, I'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.